翔平君のプレゼンテーション、7時50分からやってたよ。
Cool.
This
is
good
good
because
I'm
You're good.
Yeah, I'm just needing a moment to move things around on my own screen here. Okay, awesome, thank you. So again, my name's Robyn, and for the last 5 years, I have been a seasonal park ranger interpreter at public lands visitor centers. So park ranger interpreters are the park rangers who talk to people. We conduct programs, we give tours, we take people on hikes, and we answer questions. And for most of those 5 years, I've also been in the Master of Environmental Studies program here at Evergreen. And I've been focused on anthropogenic or human-caused climate change and how we communicate about that climate change, or not, as the case may be. So experts all around implore us to talk about climate change. They feel like it's one of the most important things we could do to address this issue. Now, also, mountains of research explain to us why it's so difficult for us to do this as human beings. And it's not conversations that we generally want to bring up, say, the dinner party or something, or the social event. However, park ranger interpreters are directed to talk about climate change most of the time because of the critical importance to public lands. So for my thesis, I want to focus on how staff group dynamics at these public lands visitor centers could impact individual park ranger interpreters' willingness to talk about climate change. To do the study, I conducted interviews with park ranger interpreters and supervisors, asking for stories about how they handle climate change conversations. And I asked questions about the group dynamics at their staff at their visitor center. Well, I didn't get a lot of specific detailed stories about talking about climate change, but I did get a sense of how well prepared park ranger interpreters are to handle controversial subjects. They develop extensive skills, they go through a lot of training, they adjust what they learn to their own personalities and how that is best for them to respond to controversial subjects. And they also, all the people I interviewed had a general consensus that the important part about talking about anthropogenic climate change was to make it relate to the individual visitor, to the individual person. So I learned all kinds of wonderful metaphors about climate change. And one of them is this one: climate is all the clothing you own. Weather is what you wear that day. So this interpreter is simultaneously connecting weather and climate and also distinguishing them in a way that most visitors at these public lands can understand. It was also interesting that climate change is not the most common controversial subject that occurs in these visitor centers. Park ranger interpreters get lots of practice with contentious subjects through all these other controversial subjects, like age of the earth, land use, slavery, fish hatcheries, pros and cons, politics, particularly the last 2 elections, and for the summer of 2020, COVID protocols and whether or not those would be enforced at the visitor centers. And that was the one topic that was not only contentious between the staff and the visitors, but also was contentious amongst the staff. And one interpreter said to me, she felt like it was a dress rehearsal for what's coming down the line as climate change impacts get more severe. So in terms of staff group dynamics, what I heard was mostly positive. Supervisors that I spoke with told me how they actively work to create group cohesion, to bring groups together to depend on each other. They talked about things like shared experience and understanding. And they told me how they urged the staff to take care of each other. The individual staff members told me about how they build group interdependence by creating expertise niches, sort of like in ecological communities, you'll have the organisms that all do different things that when combined together work really well. So as you can see, my one quote there, send me all the rock questions, that was from an interpreter who told me how she actively declares herself on day one as a geology helper. And there were many other wonderful situations like that. That really, really interested me. And they also talked about how they go to others for help, how they recognize other people's specialties, and that it's a team effort. So this group cohesion plus interdependence in the research tends to lead towards stable and functional groups. So basically, there seemed to be a positive environment for talking about anthropogenic climate change. So for me, the really interesting finding was the tension between customer service and educating the public. So as I put here, it's hard to make climate change fun to learn about. Park ranger interpreters tend to be people who like other people. You mostly go for this job if you're friendly and you want to connect with other people. So park rangers told me they like sharing excitement for where they are and what they know. One person said to me, I like knowing stuff and relaying it to others. I like helping people. And as you're trained to be a park ranger interpreter, you understand that your number one goal is to facilitate a positive emotional connection between the visitor and your site. And there's some mantra that park ranger interpreters say that is, people will only care for what they care about. So if you want people to support public lands, if you want them to visit public lands, and if you want them to care about the conservation of public lands, you want them to have, then you need to help them have a positive connection to the public lands they visit. So you can see with all that focus on the positive, how customer service is going to trump scientific information if that information is controversial, or basically if it might possibly lead to a negative interaction. Now, the other things park ranger interpreters are supposed to do is educate the public. But while we're educating the public, we are also to allow for a diversity of opinion. Now, one of the park ranger interpreters I interviewed, she said that to her, climate change denial is a conspiracy theory. But how do you not discriminate on that perspective? And that may seem pretty obvious when you're talking about climate change, like, okay, this is science, you know, not somebody's opinion. However, these are public lands. They are owned by all of us. And it makes sense that people would feel that they have an important stake in public lands and that they should be able to express themselves and their opinions and their ideas about things while they're there. And if it seems, you know, again, like I said, kind of hard to imagine why you should accept the perspective on climate change that perhaps it's not real, there are other things that come up that also perhaps contradict some science. Like, for instance, there are culturally different perspectives on the natural phenomena of where buffalo or bison came from to North America, how they got to North America. So if you're at a visitor center and you're talking to a Western science-trained paleontologist, you might be talking about how bison crossed the Bering Strait on the land bridge that was revealed during the Ice Age and then made their way into North America. But if you're speaking with a Lakota elder, that person might say, oh, no, no. Buffalo came out of Wind Cave to this plane of existence, and my people followed the buffalo out. Where do you draw the line? If you allow for that perspective, what are those perspectives you don't allow for? And keep in mind, you have to make this decision in the moment. So you could be having a really good interaction with the visitor. You could be smiling. They could be happy. You'd be feeling good. And then all of a sudden they'll say, but you know, climate change is a hoax. It was invented by Al Gore to make money, for example. And you have to decide right then, to challenge or not? How far do you go? You know, do you want to keep the interaction happy? Do you take a risk that it might go wrong? Do you feel like it's more important that the person understand that the science doesn't back up what he or she is saying? And you also have to make that decision while being concerned that your coworkers are going to agree with you and back you up, that your boss will be happy with the way you handle it, and that other visitors around you are going to approve of the way you deal with the situation. So in terms of my research question about group impacts on climate change conversations, the thing I heard from all my staff interviews was that park ranger interpreters share the idea that the group dynamic that matters the most, that really matters, that impacts their decision on their willingness to talk about anthropogenic climate change, is the social interaction between the park ranger interpreter and the visitor or visitors, that small personal relationship. And that relationship is heavily weighted to be positive. It's heavily weighted by just the way park ranger interpreters interpret their job description, that they need to make that positive emotional connection, and also by being a human being. As Michael Tomasello says, humans are the ultra-social, ultra-cooperative species amongst mammals and primates, similar to the way that ants and bees are ultra-social, ultra-cooperative amongst the insects. So I feel like starting with this awareness of two things, the magnitude for general human beings to talk about anthropogenic climate change, because it is, under one theory, terror management theory, like how our minds have evolved to handle something about the potential end of civilization as we know it. It's a heavy subject. It's not easy to talk about. So we're all starting there as before we even get to what park ranger interpreters are trying to do on public lands visitor centers, where they want to hold that tension between keeping people happy, but also giving them information that is critically important to the places that they care about, these public lands. I think if we start understanding what we're asking people, park ranger interpreters and other people, to do to talk about anthropogenic climate change, I think if we understand how difficult that is, it's going to be a lot easier to build the infrastructure and the support that we need to handle these situations. So that said, I want to open the floor to talking about anthropogenic climate change. And if anybody has any questions or any comments, I would be happy to hear those now. Thank you very much for your attention. I appreciate it.